Becca Mitchell had perfected the art of being invisible. At 34, she moved through her Phoenix apartment complex like a ghost. Pleasant nods to neighbors, quick trips to her mailbox, never lingering long enough for small talk. Her Honda Civic, now in its 10th year, sat in the same parking spot every evening at 5:15 p.m. sharp. To anyone watching, she was just another office worker grinding through life. Her job at Mountain View Insurance suited her perfectly. Administrative work, predictable hours, minimal human interaction. Her supervisor, Janet, appreciated Becca's reliability even if she'd twice passed her over for promotion, citing lack of presence as the reason. Becca had simply nodded, as if the assessment were both expected and deserved. The only hint of something different lay hidden in her apartment. While her living room was sparse and unremarkable, one wall remained conspicuously bare with small nail holes where frames had once hung. In her nightstand drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a tarnished gold medal. She'd touch it sometimes on particularly difficult days, running her fingers over the partially worn inscription before quickly hiding it away again. 3 months ago, everything changed when she drove past Desert Vista MMA Gym and saw something that made her pull over. Through the window, she watched a young woman struggling with basic techniques while male fighters snickered nearby. The woman's face, frustrated, embarrassed, but determined, triggered something Becca had spent years suppressing. The next day, she signed up for a membership. The receptionist, a tattooed young man named Kyle, barely glanced at her ID as he processed her payment. If her name meant anything to him, he showed no sign. The MMA world had moved on, her brief moment of prominence 8 years ago now forgotten by all but a few. For weeks, she kept to herself, using equipment during off-peak hours, slowly rebuilding strength that had been maintained through secret late-night workouts in her living room. She wrapped her hands differently to hide telltale calluses, performed at half capacity, learning the gym's social dynamics while remaining invisible. Desert Vista wasn't prestigious, but it was respected in the regional circuit. The walls were covered with photos of their star attraction. Tyler the Sledgehammer Brooks, undefeated at 16-0 with a brutal fighting style that had caught the attention of major promoters. His cocky smile dominated the promotional materials, presented as the ideal every member should aspire to reach. Brooks held court in the gym like a king among subjects, his entourage of one-ups hanging on his every word. The gym owner, Marcus Wilson, treated him like royalty, and why wouldn't he? Brooks was their ticket to the big time, their connection to serious money and recognition. Becca watched it all, cataloging personalities and power structures, never imagining she'd soon be at the center of it. The confrontation wasn't planned. Becca had simply decided to train during prime hours for the first time, hoping to use the heavy bag when it wasn't monopolized by Brooks and his crew. She should have known better. Well, looks like someone took a wrong turn, Brooks announced as she set down her gym bag. His voice carried across the gym, ensuring everyone heard. The yoga studio's down the street, sweetheart. Laughter rippled through the space. Becca felt dozens of eyes on her as she quietly began wrapping her hands, hoping to avoid escalation. She'd dealt with intimidation before. Different context, same energy. I'm talking to you, Brooks pressed, stepping closer. You deaf or just stupid? The gym fell silent except for the rhythmic thump of someone's jump rope in the corner. Marcus Wilson emerged from his office, not to intervene, but to watch the show with amused interest. I have a membership, Becca said quietly, meeting Brooks' eyes for the first time. I'm just here to train. Train? Brooks laughed, a harsh sound that his followers immediately echoed. Lady, this isn't Planet Fitness. We don't play pretend here. He kicked her gym bag, sending its contents spilling across the floor. Water bottle, hand wraps, a small towel, ordinary items that suddenly felt like evidence of her inadequacy under the collective gaze of the gym. Oops, Brooks smirked. Butterfingers. As Becca knelt to gather her belongings, her cheeks burning with humiliation, she heard Wilson's voice. Maybe stick to the treadmill area. Safer for everyone involved. The few women in the gym, all young, all eager for acceptance from the men, whispered and giggled behind their hands. One, a bleached blonde named Christy, spoke loud enough for Becca to hear. Some people just don't know their place. Becca stood slowly, bag clutched against her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to never return, to retreat back into the safety of invisibility. Instead, she walked to the woman's locker room with measured steps, refusing to run despite the laughter that followed her. In the mirror, her reflection looked back, face flushed, eyes bright with suppressed rage. For a moment, something else flickered there, something dangerous and familiar. Then she blinked and it was gone, replaced by the careful neutrality she'd perfected over 8 years of hiding. She didn't use any equipment that day. She simply sat in her car afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel, while Brooks and his crew continued their workouts through the window. Wilson had been right about one thing. She should have known her place. The question was, what exactly was her place? The next day, Becca returned. Surprised faces greeted her entry, whispers following her to the locker room. Wilson intercepted her before she could reach any equipment. "Look, Rebecca," he said, voice artificially friendly. "Yesterday was unfortunate. But you have to understand, this facility caters to serious athletes. Insurance concerns, you know. Liability issues." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at a fitness center. More your speed." When Becca quietly insisted on using her paid membership, Wilson's facade cracked. "Honey, this isn't a place for middle-aged housewives to live out rocky fantasies. You're disrupting the professionals." The term middle-aged stung. At 34, she was hardly over the hill, but in Wilson's worldview, she was already obsolete. His final words came with a patronizing pat on her shoulder. "Try pilates. Much more appropriate for your demographic." Word spread quickly. When Becca used the treadmill, other members pointed and whispered. Her locker was vandalized with LEAVE scrawled in permanent marker. The front desk lost her membership information twice, forcing her to provide ID and payment records repeatedly. The younger female fighters proved the cruelest. Desperate for acceptance in the male-dominated space, they used Becca as a target to prove their belonging. "That's her," one stage whispered to another as Becca wrapped her hands. "The one who thinks she's a fighter. My boyfriend says she actually cried when Tyler owned her," came the reply, deliberately loud. "Pathetic. Some people just don't know when they're out of their league." Becca gave them nothing. No reaction, no acknowledgement, maintaining the neutral expression that had protected her for years. Inside, familiar rage built like pressure in a sealed container. Equipment she needed was mysteriously always occupied or under maintenance when she arrived. The heavy bag she preferred was raised to an impossible height. When she asked for assistance lowering it, staff members smirked. "If you can't handle the equipment as is, maybe this isn't your sport." She adapted, using her technical knowledge to modify exercises, finding workarounds for every obstacle. Wilson watched her, sometimes his expression calculating, as if trying to figure out why she hadn't quit yet. Things escalated when a local sports blogger visited to profile Brooks before his upcoming title shot. Spotting Becca struggling with weights that had been deliberately increased when she wasn't looking, he captured her stumble on camera. The next day, a mocking post appeared. Desert Vista's charity case. When inclusion goes too far. The photo of Becca, red-faced and grimacing, went semi-viral in the local MMA community. Comments ranged from crude jokes to speculation about her motives. "Probably just wants to be around young guys," one suggested. "Midlife crisis," wrote another. No one defended her. No one questioned the underlying assumption that she had no right to be there. The photo appeared on the gym's bulletin board with a handwritten caption. Why we need membership standards. Becca tore it down, only to find copies posted everywhere the next day. She heard the whispered nickname following her. Charity case. It stuck, spreading through the gym like a virus. The final humiliation came during an open training day, when regional coaches visited to scout talent. Wilson announced that members would demonstrate skills in mini-sessions, a chance for exposure to higher levels of competition. When Becca's turn arrived, Brooks volunteered to help the lady out. What followed was calculated cruelty disguised as instruction. He didn't hurt her physically, too many witnesses, but he toyed with her, making her look clumsy and incompetent. Every move she attempted was counted effortlessly while he winked at the laughing audience. "See, this is why women like you should stick to cardio," Brooks announced as Becca hit the mat for the 5th time. "No offense, but there's a difference between real fighters and hobbyists. You're wasting everyone's time here." The visiting coaches shook their heads, some laughing behind their hands. One muttered something about insurance nightmares loud enough for Wilson to hear and nod in agreement. That evening, Wilson announced new experience requirements for membership. Existing members would need to demonstrate competency or find more suitable facilities. The message was clear. Becca's days were numbered. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 2 hours, tears of humiliation and rage streaming down her face. Everything she'd endured 8 years ago came flooding back. The betrayal, the helplessness, the systematic destruction of her identity. She had spent nearly a decade hiding from her own power, and for what? To still be humiliated, still be pushed aside, still be told she didn't belong. The face in her rearview mirror was a stranger's. A woman who had allowed herself to be diminished, erased. But her hands, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, still held the strength they'd always possessed. The muscles maintained through years of secret training still contained knowledge her mind had tried to forget. That night, she did something she hadn't done in 8 years. She pulled out her phone and searched William Crane MMA Empire. The results showed he'd expanded his operation, now owning a chain of elite gyms across the country, including a recent acquisition, Desert Vista MMA. The connection hit her like a physical blow. Brooks wasn't just the gym's champion, he was Crane's newest protege, being groomed for national prominence. The same system that had destroyed her career was thriving right in front of her. One photo showed Crane with his arm around Brooks' shoulders, both grinning at a press conference. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable to Becca's trained eye, stood Vanessa "Viper" Rodriguez, now retired and working as a talent scout for Crane's organization. The circle had closed. The people who had stolen her career, her identity, her future, were here in Phoenix. They didn't even recognize the ghost they'd created. Becca found herself laughing, a harsh, unfamiliar sound in her quiet apartment. The irony was perfect. She'd run across the country to escape them, only to have them follow her path of destruction to her doorstep. Her laughter faded as she stared at the screen. Brooks had the same cocky confidence Rodriguez had displayed before their championship fight. Crane wore the same predatory smile he'd had when dismissing her accusations as desperate excuses. This time would be different. This time, she wouldn't run. Becca spent the next week diving deep into records, using skills she developed during her insurance work to investigate patterns and connections. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions and revealed something even more disturbing. Desert Vista wasn't just another gym in Crane's empire. It was a testing ground. Promising fighters were brought in, their potential assessed, and then either recruited into Crane's stable or systematically broken down if they posed a threat to his existing stars. She found forum posts from former members, fighters who'd been inexplicably humiliated or injured during routine training sessions. One particularly detailed account came from a woman named Lisa Chen, who'd been a rising welterweight before a suspicious training injury ended her career at Desert Vista. "I was dominating regional competition, Lisa's post read: "Then I had one session with their top trainer and somehow tore my ACL during basic grappling. The medical report said it looked like deliberate hyperextension, but I couldn't prove anything. By the time I recovered, my momentum was gone and sponsors had moved on." Similar stories appeared across multiple platforms. Fighters who got too close to threatening Crane's established stars would suffer mysterious setbacks, always just plausible enough to avoid investigation. Becca created a timeline mapping incidents across Crane's gym network. The pattern was clear: systematic elimination of potential competition through psychological warfare, deliberate injuries, or outright sabotage. She also researched Brooks' rise. His record looked impressive until you examined his opponents closely. Most were carefully selected, either past their prime, coming off losses, or dealing with personal issues. The few legitimate contenders he'd faced had suffered unusual setbacks in training leading up to their fights. One video interview caught her attention. A fighter named Mike Torres described his experience. "Week before the Brooks fight, I was sparring at Desert Vista. Neutral territory, you know, but something felt off. I was getting tired way too fast, couldn't focus. Thought I was getting sick. Lost the fight badly, never felt right about it." Torres had been undefeated before facing Brooks. After the loss, his career spiraled, sponsors disappeared, and he eventually quit fighting altogether. The most damaging evidence came from financial records she accessed through her insurance industry connections. Payments from Crane's organization to various gyms, medical facilities, and even some athletic commissions. The amounts were small enough to avoid attention but consistent enough to suggest systematic corruption. But Becca's breakthrough came when she found an old forum post from her former coach. Marcus Turner had never stopped investigating her case, even after his accident. Hidden in a thread about MMA judging corruption was his detailed analysis of the sedative found in her system, and his theory about how it was administered. The water bottle switch, he'd written. Classic misdirection. Rodriguez's cornerman accidentally enters the wrong area, hands off the bottle, apologizes, and leaves. By the time anyone notices, the damage is done. Turner had identified the specific sedative used and traced its procurement to a veterinary supply company owned by one of Crane's shell corporations. He'd connected 12 similar incidents across different promotions, all involving fighters who posed threats to Crane's roster. But Turner had never published his findings. The post was dated 3 days before his car accident. Becca printed everything, creating a comprehensive file that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning nearly a decade. She had evidence, but evidence alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to expose the system in a way that couldn't be covered up or dismissed. That's when she saw the announcement on Desert Vista's website. Open Challenge Night. Think you can hang with the sledgehammer? Brooks would take on any local fighter in a 3-minute exhibition match. Marketing gold for his upcoming title shot, designed to showcase his dominance against overmatched opposition. The registration deadline was tomorrow. For the first time in 8 years, Rebecca "Silent Storm" Mitchell began to plan a fight. Becca registered under her real name, knowing the risk. If anyone at the gym connected Rebecca Mitchell to the fighter who'd vanished 8 years ago, her plan would crumble. But the MMA world's memory was short, and a moment of fame had been brief. Wilson approved her application with visible glee, telling his staff, "This will teach her the lesson she's been begging for." The exhibition was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, designed as a publicity stunt for Brooks' upcoming title fight. Local news would cover it, with Brooks promising to put on a show against whoever was brave enough or stupid enough to step into the ring. Becca spent the week watching every available video of Brooks' fights, analyzing his patterns with the same methodical approach that had once made her legendary. What she found was encouraging. Brooks was athletic and powerful, but technically limited. He relied on aggression and strength, bulldozing through overmatched opponents who were too intimidated to fight back effectively. Against experienced fighters, cracks showed. He dropped his guard after combinations, telegraphed his power shots, and had never developed sophisticated ground defense. Most importantly, he'd never faced anyone who refused to be intimidated. She modified her training routine, focusing on the specific techniques that would exploit his weaknesses. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath years of deliberate suppression but intact. Her hands remembered the precise angles for maximum impact. Her body recalled the subtle weight shifts that generated explosive power from minimal movement. The hardest part was mental preparation. For 8 years, she trained herself to be invisible, to avoid confrontation, to absorb humiliation without response. Now she had to access the part of herself that had once stepped into cages without fear, knowing that one mistake could mean unconsciousness or worse. Friday night, she made a phone call she'd been avoiding. Turner residence came the familiar gruff voice. "Marcus, it's Rebecca." The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. "I always knew you'd call," he finally said. "When you were ready." She told him about the gym, about Brooks, about the connection to Crane. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to remind them who I am." "And then what?" "You think one exhibition match will bring down Crane's empire?" "No," she admitted, "but it'll get their attention. Make them nervous. Maybe force mistakes." "Rebecca," Marcus said softly, "be careful. These people destroyed your career once. They won't hesitate to do worse if they feel threatened." "I know, but I can't keep running. And if I don't act now, how many more fighters will they destroy?" "Then be smart about it. Don't just beat Brooks. Expose him. Make it impossible for them to dismiss or cover up. And for God's sake, watch your back afterward." That night, Becca laid out her fight gear for the first time in 8 years. Plain black shorts and sports bra. Nothing flashy or memorable. She wrapped her hands using the traditional method Turner had taught her, muscle memory guiding each precise movement. In the mirror, she saw a different person than the timid administrative assistant who'd been humiliated weeks earlier. The woman looking back had dangerous eyes and predator's posture. For the first time in nearly a decade, Rebecca Mitchell looked like what she'd always been, a fighter. Saturday afternoon, Desert Vista MMA was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through social media about the office lady challenging the champion. Phones were ready to capture what everyone assumed would be a humiliating beatdown. Brooks made his entrance like a conquering hero, entrance music blaring, surrounded by his entourage. He wore a silk robe emblazoned with his nickname, playing to the crowd that had come to see him dominate another overmatched opponent. In the corner, Becca warmed up quietly, her movements precise and economical. A few people noticed the fluidity of her technique, but most were too focused on the spectacle of Brooks' arrival to pay attention. William Crane had made a surprise appearance, sitting ringside with regional MMA officials. When his eyes found Becca, something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or just calculation. He leaned over to whisper something to Brooks that made the fighter laugh and pound his gloves together. The announcer introduced Brooks with a lengthy recitation of his achievements, the crowd roaring approval. When Becca's name was called, the introduction was dismissive. Rebecca Mitchell, making her amateur debut. No one corrected the error. Becca slipped off her plain sweatshirt, revealing a fighter's physique that had been carefully concealed for months. Lean, defined muscles spoke of countless hours of disciplined training. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people realized they might not be seeing what they'd expected. The referee called both fighters to center ring. Brooks bounced on his toes, smirking, making a show of not taking her seriously. Becca stood perfectly still, her focus absolute. When Brooks extended his gloves for the traditional touch, Becca simply turned and walked back to her corner. The crowd buzzed at the breach of etiquette, but she wasn't interested in rituals. The bell rang. Brooks circled lazily, hands low, inviting her to make the first move. Becca remained centered, revealing nothing of her skill level. Growing impatient, Brooks lunged forward with a showy combination meant to intimidate rather than damage. Becca slipped the punches with minimal movement, her footwork suddenly precise and economical. Brooks' expression shifted from amusement to mild surprise. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Stop dancing," and hit her. Brooks nodded, his demeanor hardening. The crowd expected a show, and he intended to deliver. He pressed forward with more serious intent, throwing a powerful right hand that had ended several professional fights. Becca didn't just avoid it. She countered with a lightning-fast jab that snapped his head back. The crowd's laughter faltered. Brooks touched his nose, checking for blood, then charged forward with a flurry of strikes. Becca weaved through them all like water flowing around stones. When Brooks staggered backward, genuine confusion clouded his features. This wasn't following the script. From ringside, Crane leaned forward, his casual posture suddenly tense. Rage replaced showmanship. Brooks bull-rushed her, attempting to use his superior size and strength to overwhelm her with brute force. It was exactly what Becca had anticipated. She used his momentum against him, executing a textbook throw that slammed him to the mat with shocking force. The impact echoed through the suddenly quiet gym. Before he could recover, she transitioned smoothly into a submission hold, a complex arm lock that had been her signature move years ago. Brooks, too proud to tap out, struggled desperately. Becca applied precisely enough pressure to make him understand his situation without causing injury. Their eyes met, and in that moment, he recognized what he was facing. Not an amateur, not a hobbyist, but a master. She released the hold and rose fluidly to her feet, allowing him to stand. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Brooks scrambled up, all pretense gone. Now he was fighting with genuine effort, but Becca had entered a flow state that had once made her legendary. Each of his attacks met a perfect counter. Each of his defenses was penetrated with surgical precision. She wasn't just fighting him. She was dismantling him, exposing every flaw in his game for the cameras that were no longer mocking but mesmerized. The seconds ticked by, 30, then 60, then 90. Brooks, now bleeding and breathing hard, grew increasingly desperate. Some in the crowd began cheering for the unexpected underdog who was revealing herself to be anything but. With 10 seconds left, Brooks made a final, desperate lunge. Becca sidestepped gracefully and delivered a perfectly placed strike that caught him precisely on the point of his chin. He dropped to the mat, unconscious. The timer showed exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds had elapsed. In the absolute silence that followed, Becca stood over Brooks for just a moment, then turned to face William Crane directly. Recognition dawned on his face as she removed her hand wraps, revealing a distinctive crescent-shaped scar on her wrist, a mark that had been featured in fight promotions before her career was destroyed. Without a word, she tossed the wraps at his feet and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the referee officially declared her the winner. The crowd, still processing what they'd witnessed, began to stir. Someone started clapping, slowly at first, then joined by others. As she reached the door, someone called out, "Who is she?" The question rippled through the crowd as phones frantically searched for answers. By the time Becca stepped outside, the video was already uploading, accompanied by increasingly urgent messages from sports journalists who were beginning to connect the dots. The silent storm had returned, and this time, the whole world would see the lightning. Within hours, the video had spread across every MMA platform and beyond. Old footage of Silent Storm Mitchell in her prime was being compared to the mysterious woman who had just dismantled Tyler Brooks. The story was breaking in real time. The controversial disappearance of a rising star, the suspicious circumstances of her championship loss, and now her dramatic return. Sports journalists who had dismissed her accusations 8 years ago were suddenly very interested in revisiting the case. The sedative found in her system, Marcus Turner's accident, the pattern of promising fighters suffering mysterious setbacks in Crane's organization. All of it was being examined with fresh eyes. William Crane issued a statement denying any knowledge of wrongdoing, but his empire was already showing cracks. 3 fighters publicly came forward with stories of suspicious training injuries. 2 athletic commissions announced investigations into judging irregularities at Crane-promoted events. Most damaging was the financial investigation triggered by Becca's documented evidence. The FBI's Sports Corruption Task Force, armed with meticulously compiled records, began tracing payments that connected Crane to veterinary suppliers, medical facilities, and officials across multiple states. Desert Vista MMA was shut down pending investigation. Marcus Wilson was arrested on charges ranging from fraud to criminal conspiracy. Tyler Brooks, his reputation shattered and his title shot cancelled, faced questions about his knowledge of his management's activities. But perhaps the most satisfying development came 2 weeks later when Becca returned to the gym, now under new management, to train. A young woman approached her hesitantly, the same fighter she'd seen struggling months earlier. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I saw the video. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing us we don't have to accept how they treat us. For proving that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous." Becca smiled, not the careful, neutral expression she'd worn for 8 years, but something genuine and warm. "What's your name?" "Ashley Martinez. I've been training here for 6 months, but after what you did, I think I'm ready to actually fight now." "Good. The sport needs more fighters who won't be intimidated." As Ashley walked away, Becca caught her reflection in the gym's mirrors. The woman looking back was neither the broken fighter who'd fled Phoenix 8 years ago, nor the invisible administrative assistant who'd hidden her power. She was something new. A survivor who'd found her strength not in revenge, but in refusing to let others be silenced the way she had been. Her phone buzzed with another interview request from ESPN. She deleted it without reading. She'd given the world what it needed. Proof that corruption could be exposed, bullies could be humbled, and sometimes the person everyone underestimated was exactly who they should have feared most. 3 months later, Marcus Turner visited Phoenix for the first time since his accident. Over dinner, he asked what she planned to do next. "Train," Becca said simply. "Help other fighters avoid what happened to me. Make sure gyms like Desert Vista can't exist anymore." "And fighting? Professionally?" She considered the question, twirling pasta around her fork. "Maybe. But if I do, it'll be on my terms. No more hiding, no more being invisible. The world knows who Rebecca Mitchell is now." The silent storm. "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "Just a fighter who finally remembered how to fight back." Outside the restaurant, Phoenix's desert sky stretched endlessly above them, clear and unobstructed. For the first time in 8 years, Becca looked up at it without feeling the need to hide. The storm had passed, but the strength it had revealed would remain, not just for her, but for every fighter who came after, who would now know that sometimes the most devastating strikes come from the quietest corners, delivered by those who refuse to stay silent any longer. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.